What's up, everybody? I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and welcome to another episode of The Right Mindset. Today, we are going to be talking with author Dawn Reno Langley. Did I say that right? Langley? Langley.
Yes, you did.
All right. Hey, I got it right. Sometimes, people mess up names. My name's Bellezza, but I just let people Americanize it where they're like, Bellezza.
Well, it has the Z's,
Yeah, those, the Sicilians, we like to play with the letters and the sounds and everything. But ultimately, thank you so much for coming on. I know you reached out to me and you were like, hey, can I come on and talk some writing? And that's exactly what we do on the show. But more importantly, you've been writing for quite some time. If the audience doesn't know, you are not a scientist.
No.
You are a writer. And
Right.
even though you've spent time with a one-eyed elephant, you've taken those experiences and put them into books from the Mourning Parade, to other novels that you've worked on. So let's really just jump right into it, Dawn. What gave you some interest to jump on the show and give the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I think that at this stage of the game, I've got a lot to offer. I've taught MFA students and bachelor's and associate degrees, you name it. And I've got a lot of years in a lot of different genres. The only thing I have not published in is screenplays. So don't ask me a screenplay question because I have no clue. But I've done all of the other things and published in all of those genres. And at this stage of the game, I've learned a few things. So I thought, this would be interesting. I like talking about writing, especially with someone who makes that the focus of this show. So that's why I was interested.
Yeah, a lot of times you hear people talking on the radio and they're like, writing, and they critique other people's stories. But I always wanted people to kind of like discuss their process, because I've always had this desire to show other writers, especially ones that have that little nerve to, do I or do I not do it? And realize there's not a one size fits all kind of mentality, that we all have our processes. And just because you do it one way doesn't make this way wrong. So it's always nice to kind of hear how other writers really attack their manuscripts. Some outline, some don't outline. But you said you don't write scripts, though. So have you just been nervous to do it? Is it something you're not interested in?
Actually, one of my agents tried to get me to write I did. What's it called? It's like a 7-page outline that breaks it down into acts and so forth. I'd never done that before for a screenplay.
Yeah.
It's a treatment. That's what they call it.
Treatment. Yeah, the treatment. Yeah.
And that was back when I was first writing novels. So she asked me to do that, and I did. But I found that the format is totally different than writing a novel. You really have to pay attention to dialogue more than describing a scene. I'm looking out my window right now at this beautiful meadow and gardens leading up to it and fantastic long pine trees. And I would rather write that than write line and line and line of dialogue, nothing else but dialogue. I like the meandering sentences and getting to play with structure and think about parallel structure a lot.
You can't go wrong with a purple prose, but in a screenplay,
No, you can't have it in a screenplay. By the way, this is apple juice.
Excellent. Fun fact, I'm allergic to apples, so don't get that over here on me. I don't want to.
I won't spill it on you. Promise.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dawn.
Go ahead.
No, I was just... Your turn.
I was just thinking when you talked about structure and process, every genre is different for me. And I don't think about that very often. You don't talk to people about your process very often. But now that I'm here, I'm at a writer's retreat right now, and I'm working on a novel that I've been working on for a couple of decades. And that process of digging into that novel, sometimes changing complete characters, points of view, timeline, that takes me much more time than doing a 700-page piece of nonfiction.
Yeah.
That nonfiction just goes boom and I'm done. I mean, it's like, okay, maybe I edit it twice.
Yeah.
With novels, if I haven't massaged that sentence 15 times at least, then it's not enough.
Well, the big difference between those nonfiction and the fiction is the nonfiction, especially if it's a self-help book or if it's a study of, those words could fly right off. You don't really have to worry about immersion or character arcs or anything that's, I would say, a depth. It's sort of just getting out that data. Whereas in a fiction book, even if it is about a specific subject, sort of like I believe one of your most current books is tackling a very diverse subject, one might say,
Mm-hmm.
a touchy topic, which
Right.
I'm going to be happy to talk about that. But ultimately, you can't just put information in a fiction book.
That's
The
right.
exposition gets tiring, so you have to create
That's
these
right.
arcs. And
I'll share something with you right now. I mean, I've been working on this book for decades.
oh, go
I
for it.
came to this, I came to this retreat, and they have a little library, and this is one of the books that was in there. It's a Funkin Wagnall's Encyclopedia of 1957. If you
Oh,
see it
wow.
right there, which is the year that I'm working on. It's like, wow, this is definitely not something I've been looking online for a
Mhm.
book like this in the 20 years I've been writing this book.
And
And
there
I
it is.
find it in an old encyclopedia. So that's been my research. And I do a lot of research. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, you
You
got it. You got
can't
to know what you're
write
talking
a
about.
novel without doing some research.
Now, would you consider your life research as well? Do you take the elements of your
Uh,
life and put those into the foundation of the novel, and then you dress it up with the information of a said subject?
Sometimes,
Hmm.
not all the time. I think with every book that I've written, there's something, some character, scene, or setting even that I have personally experienced.
Yeah.
But the one that I'm working on now is really an event. My sister was 7 years old and was hit by a drunk driver as she was crossing the street. And I didn't realize until many, many years after in therapy that I had watched her run. She was chasing me
Wow.
across the street.
Yeah.
And I had gone into, we lived in a project and kind of a horseshoe shaped patios and so forth. And I had skirted into my house. And in the meantime, the people who lived in the front on the street were already calling for the ambulance for my sister. She died on the way to the hospital.
Wow.
She wasn't dead, though. She
Hmm.
just was dead on arrival. And to this day, her body's kind of breaking down after that accident. They basically sewed her veins back to her heart. It
Wow.
was it was written about in the New England Medical Journal.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's the little crux, the beginning of the story.
Hmm.
And then I went off from there because I wanted to see, since the truck driver was a drunk,
Yeah. Yeah.
what happened when he went home. How
How
did
did
he
he
deal with
do?
his wife? And then that just blew out of proportion. It's ended up being a much different story, but the same little central inspiration that weaves its way throughout the plot.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you lived with the story that you didn't tell, and to work kind of through that cathartic, experience is like, how do I write about the other side? Like maybe this will help me work through the PTS of it and the trauma of it, and
Mhm.
etc. So, uh, yeah, the traumas of life could really disrupt us. But when you have, and I believe you quoted, creativity helps move the world. It helps change the world. Art heals the world. It lets us understand the world, but at the same time, it helps us with our own world. In
Right.
your case, writing this book. Leaning on that, I noticed that a lot of your books, based on reading some of the descriptions of them, they do touch on very I don't want to say dark topics, but emotional topics through some sort of event, as you put it, an event, either it be death or pain or some sort of loss, in the metaphorical way. uh is that a choice? Is that something, or that you said, these are things that I feel should be explored, or is it just where your writer heart kind of goes to?
Um, I think it's really both. I think it's, I know the first article that I ever wrote was on the Cuban Missile Crisis and how I felt as a child when we were being threatened with nuclear war.
Oh yeah.
And I had very strong feelings about that. And I joke that started off my not so pacifist attitude sometimes. Not that I'm not a pacifist, I am, but
Yeah.
I get mad, Stop bringing those guns to school or I'm going to kill you. I'm kidding. That's not a funny subject.
At all.
And I'm very, very, that's my topic. That's the one I get up on my soapbox and I don't get down. We talk about gun control.
Well, that's the Mourning Parade, or
Mourning
is that?
Parade, yeah, that has,
Yeah.
Yep. But that, that's also got a lot of animal abuse stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I did visit the elephant park that I write about in that story. I redesigned
Thailand, right? In Thailand?
Yep, in Thailand. Yeah, I write about things I care about. And I look back at the novels that now make up my body of work, and I think I do write about things that are emotional.
Yep.
I do. I'm not a humorous writer. I don't even like watching comic movies.
You've never seen a 40-Year-Old Virgin?
It's tough to write about economic, social justice issues. It's really tough, but I think that we as creatives, as storytellers, we have to bring the stories that are the toughest to hear to people when they are receptive to listening.
Yeah.
A lot of people had no idea what goes on with elephants and how abused they are as they're trained. No idea. I had no idea until I started really researching it. And I've had more people come back to me about that book and say, you really taught me something. Well, I was telling a story, but doing the research to tell that story, I had to offer you some information,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had to unpack that trunk, as one might say.
Yeah.
No pun intended, of course, Do you go into a book knowing you have to research it, but while you're doing the research, it changes the function of the book, meaning like you went in for it with a purpose and you're like, oh, I got to research it. And then you research and you realize the story I wanted to tell is not the one that needs to be told.
Yeah. What I find is that I find a subplot in what I thought was the big plot that ends up being bigger than the plot. So one feeds off each other. I'm a pretty linear thinker. I want to just tell the story, and I have to remind myself to go off in a different direction every once in a while. And I think the research helps me do that. I mean, I went off in a political thing in the Mourning Parade with one of the rather minor characters being part of the revolution. Yeah. And I was there when the revolution happened. It was so funny. They turned the TV off at 9:00 and said the Department of Peace is turning the TV off at 9:00. Wow. Department of Peace. Only Thailand would have a Department of Peace. Everybody else has a Department of War. I love that country.
Well, isn't like $100 like worth like $1.5 million? I don't know, like what is equivalent to like pesos, basically. Like American money goes pretty far there. I don't know what the exchange
is, but I know that I came home with a lot of cotton yoga pants. They were selling them everywhere on the street. So they were cheap.
That's funny. All right. So, we're hearing a little bit about what you do when you write, but let's kind of like jump into it a little bit more, let's talk about the first thing you do when you decide that writing a book is really like, you're like, I have this story and it needs to be told. What's the first thing you do?
I have a composition notebook over on the floor behind me.
Mm.
That's the first thing that comes out.
Okay.
I don't write too much like I used to, page by page. I don't do that anymore because I type so much faster.
Mm.
But the composition notebook comes out. I start taking notes on characters. I have a set of questions that I ask myself about each character. There's 40 of them. And by the time I get finished with those questions, I've written probably 25 pages about the character. So I know them pretty well.
Wow.
And then I start writing. I want to see, I don't really do a really full outline until probably I'm 3 or 4 chapters in.
Oh,
Then I
so
sit
you
back.
kind of start, yeah, just kind of like work on that. So you basically start with a zero draft, and then from there you take what you kind of established in those 3 chapters and see what the kind of voice of the book is going to be, and then that allows you to kind of see an outline a little clearer.
Yeah, I usually have a pretty good idea of what the initial structure of it is,
Mm-hmm.
but that changes big time. I mean, I've gone from long chapters to 1 page in some of the novels. In fact, the one that I'm working on now is like
Yeah.
that because it's a different type of book. It's more literary, so I pay attention to structure, but that doesn't happen till the last. The stuff that happens first is, let me get a feel for these characters. How
Yep.
do they interact with each other? What is going to push them forward? What's the setting like? Is the setting a character too? Is it just kind of a foil?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
no,
Because
when I
anyone.
learned this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just for the audience out there, like Dawn is saying, the environment is a character, or it can be an antagonistic force, and that's definitely something writers should think about. Uh, it also helps break up the monotony of, say, they're in another room, they're in another room, they're in another room, and you can say to
Right.
yourself, how can I bring the environment into the story in a way that influences choices? So it's good to look at your environment as a character or the antagonistic force, because we all know environmental force. I do want to ask, could you give us all 40 questions? No, imagine.
I can give you a good number. I've got them memorized over the years.
Actually, just for fun, what is one question that you always find helps you the best understand the character in those 40 questions of yours?
What's their nickname?
Ooh, okay.
Because, you can tell if somebody doesn't have a nickname and how they feel about it. I feel like when I'm building those questions, I'm interviewing the character. I'm
Hmm.
sitting back. I really do feel sometimes like I'm possessed a little bit. I sit back in my chair and just kind of imagine who this person is, and I ask them questions. And you get name. Name is always important because you can
Hmm.
tell somebody's nationality and other things from the name. Um, Age is important because we at 25 act differently than we do at 70. Um, we
Wait,
do.
you're telling me a 16-year-old shouldn't have the life experience of a 30-year-old?
Yeah, it makes a difference. It really does, especially if then you combine it with how that person speaks. And if the 16-year-old speaks like a 70-year-old, then that's an
Yeah,
interesting character.
I'm gonna have to go
But
back and change my first chapter.
but if you get to the point of saying, okay, what's your nickname and where did it come from?
Hmm.
Most of us do have a nickname, and that will tell you who loved or hated that person, what that interaction was like,
Yeah, yeah,
how this person feels about it, and how it's identified them throughout their lives,
yeah, yeah.
I
My
was
dad had
always
a really
called
nice
Little
one.
Dawn. My father's name was Donald. I'm not male. It always bothered me.
Donald. How do you even get
Yes.
that from Dawn? Yeah. No, my dad was very loving with his. He used to call me dumbass, and I think that really no.
Yeah. It goes to show what kind of relationship you had.
Yeah, yeah. I always felt seen.
Yeah. That instantly builds a scene, an SCENE.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's he always called me dumbass, and you're laughing about it. I can see the two of you laughing. I can see you probably playing something in the backyard a little bit too rough.
Maybe, maybe. I mean, I made that up. That was a joke on my end, but yeah,
But
no,
see where I went with that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. You can
You
create
know?
just from like a moment, just the
Yeah.
nickname. can absolutely. But that's also the sign of a good writer, is somebody not being afraid to just seeing where it goes, knowing that it can change. That's a thing I notice about young writers, especially you're an editor, and someone that can be hired for this, and I'm a developmental editor by trade, and when we deal with baby authors and new authors, a lot of times they get nervous because they're like, but this is what I came up with. And you're like, yeah, but the writing is rewriting, and great
Right.
writing is more writing.
Right.
Like you have to be comfortable with, I don't want to say killing your babies, but cutting the diamond out. You start with a rough gem, and you have to kind of like chip at it. And sometimes you got to take a risk, and that risk can lead to either a smaller diamond or a more refined diamond. And until you find your story, play with it, allow yourself to kind of jump around, and like you just did, the dumbass laughter outside. Well, what if they play rough? Like that's a great part of the discovery, because the book's not published.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You have forever to write it, and
I hope not forever, because this book that I'm working on now, if it doesn't get published soon, I think I'll cry. And I don't cry very often in this business. But this is the first book in a trilogy. So I have these characters. I have had these characters in my life for a long time.
yeah. Well, but you said it was a decade you've been working sort of on this trilogy,
It's
right?
been probably more than like 2.
Yeah, I get it.
Since the first one started. Yeah, because like I said, there's 2 other books that are complete and full and ready to go. And
Now,
these, that's those are characters that you live with, and you know what color their toenails are, you know what they read, you know what they like to eat. That's all stuff that may never make it to the page. But if
yeah,
you know that about them, then you'll know how they'll react in certain situations and what their relationship is like. If they're out somewhere and they're threatened, how are they going to react?
yeah,
You
we
know?
call that on the channel positions, characters' position, and then you want to always challenge their positions, and they'll either maintain their position, slightly change it, or change it completely. And that's how you develop your characters. Their arc changes or stay stagnant based on they don't have to change their positions, but sometimes you want them. And a position could be as simple as, I like the Giants over the Jets, or it could be as complex as, I'm in the army, but I'm choosing not to carry a gun because of my religious beliefs, and therefore, I know it's World War I or II, whatever it was, and I just want to help save people, so I'm just going to pull the wounded off the field, and that's a position.
Mm-hmm.
And it drives the story, the first act, where spoiler alert, they have to fight for their right not to hold a gun to go to war, and that's the brilliance of a position. Is it helps drive the characters and the story at the same time.
You're right. And we have to have all those little elements in place. Sometimes, though, we don't even realize what we're doing. We get into the, the place, that creative space where
Yep.
everything happens. And all the stuff, all the fancy little words and phrases about how you put this element in your writing and you put that element, goes out the window if you don't have imagination. And you
Yeah.
get to that space where you can just let it flow.
The biggest thing for most writers should be to start with what's interesting to you, and not worry about, like you're saying, the phrase, like, what is the theme? Who is the protagonist? But it's like,
I
what do
have
I want
never,
to say?
never started a book thinking, what is the theme? Oh, God, give me grace. You have to figure that out after it's written and published and people sit and digest it. And then they say, I think that theme is part of the archipelago of Greece.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we get too academic.
100%. I mean, I think you can discover your theme while you're writing, and that's fine. But it's like, to think about the fundamentals, are on the dictionary. Like, what are the writing terms? Am I using them? Like, that can almost destroy the creative outlet.
You're
How,
right.
however, once you finish your first draft, that's when you got to do the work. You got to say, are there character arcs? Am I challenging positions? Is there a full plot? What are the subplots? Like, you have to discover those and make sure there's clear cut rises and falls, and Did I do what needs to be done in the first act? Is my second act making sense? And do I have a true resolution? But doing that when you're in the creative process will almost stifle it, in my opinion.
Yeah,
That's
it'll
just
make you
my opinion.
stumble. When
Yeah.
I go through the first draft, if I'm done completely with the book, usually what I do is I find a big window or a wall, and I
Mm-hmm.
do the Post-it notes, which is what happens in each chapter,
Mm-hmm.
because the breakdown usually in a novel is chapters. What happens to each character? So, the chapters are in line like this.
Yep.
Each character has a different color in the Post-it notes. And then, if I have action, I want to have a little bit of action. And action doesn't have to be, I shot you down with a cannon. It
Yeah.
can just be two people speaking
It's
or
movement. Yeah.
movement.
Yeah.
And I want to see that in each chapter. And if I see that I'm heavy in action in one chapter and nothing happens in the chapter after that, then I have to give some serious consideration as to whether or not I even need that chapter that's not doing anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that really helps me see it visually, because we don't see that when we're writing. We don't see
Yeah.
how much time and energy we spend on a particular scene or some dialogue between the characters or some tension that's going to lead to an inciting incident. We don't see that unless we take a step back and break it out for ourselves. And that, to me, the visual has been my biggest help in outlining and making sure the story's going where it needs to go.
Yeah, because when it's just on the page, like you're saying, we can't see the world. We're not on the moon. We can't look at the world and watch it turn. We can only see what's in front of us. And it has to definitely be a positive when you're looking at the wall and one chapter has 4 post-its, another chapter has 20, and you're just like, whoops, what's going on here? I got to move some stuff around.
It's so easy, and it forces you to kind of look at your work structurally rather than emotionally through the lens of a character. When you're looking at it structurally, you're giving your reader the ability to move through the story. We have this labyrinth that we force our readers to move through, but we need to give them enough direction to get from one place to another. I think that one of the other things that I do that really kind of helps after I get through the first draft is I look at the beginnings and the closings of my chapters.
Oh, yeah.
I can't tell you how often they're so similar all the way through. And I really have to remind myself that I can cut back. I don't need that extra paragraph at the end of the chapter, leave them hanging a little bit so they
Yep.
turn the page.
Yeah.
And that really helps get it to a point where I can say, now let me think about how much time I spent with the protagonist versus the antagonist, how many pages physically, because the protagonist should be the thrust of the book. And if they're not, you have a major problem.
What do you mean? No.
Yeah, you have a major problem.
Well, it is a process, as we always say, and getting any story together, especially with the post-its, like with screenwriting, you said you didn't really touch on screen, but a lot of my career was in the Hollywood, and that's a big thing because every line in a screenplay is considered money, right? So every line is going to cost money. And a lot of times you look at a scene and they do that. They break up each scene with those post-its, and sometimes they just write it on a whiteboard, especially if you're doing television. And the big thing they go, why do we need this character? And then one of the writers will be like, well, that character is going to give the exposition needed for this. And they're like, well, how about we get rid of that character and give the exposition to this character? Because now we just saved money. And now we don't even need this scene because we don't have to be in this location. We can do all that in this. And it's the same thing with writing. We're not trying to save money in the sense, but you're trying to save word count because word count is the money, right? It's the cost of the story. And one of my mentors used to tell me, they go, when you're charging your story the cost of the words, do those words, are they worth anything? Are they doing anything to your story? And if not, you got to take back those words and put some money back in your bank so you can afford to put words where things are needed, which is basically what you're saying with scenes. Sometimes one scene is over heavy, one scene is light, and it's like, how do we even that out? Which also comes back to writers are nervous because, oh, but this is what I wrote. This is exactly
You
what it has
can't
to
be
be.
married to your words. You cannot be
Yeah.
married to your words. This is a business.
Mm-hmm.
These are products that are malleable. We
Yep.
can change these. In fact, I think I have the most fun when I go in and I just rip a story apart. I might keep only the characters the same, but the rest of the story is getting ripped apart. I'm changing the point of view. I'm
Yep.
taking it from, one place to another. I'm just totally destroying the background. Whatever the case, that's when I have fun. That's when I get in there and I really think about the impact of every single word in the sentence. The first draft, messy verbs. Who cares about the characters? Just
Yep.
get it down. When I go through it the second time, then I'm taking care of my language.
Yeah. And you're
And by the
adding and
time I
taking
go through
away.
it 10 times, that language better be damn good. And maybe now I'm even graduating to similes and metaphors.
What's a simile? No. So, yeah, and additionally, when you're going through each draft and you're kind of cleaning it up and stuff like that, you're right. The first draft should be just drop it down on the page and not worry about it. And more so, as you go through each draft, you will know in your heart if it's working or not working, and if the change is benefiting. And the great part is you could always revert back to what it was if it isn't working, because you should be saving alternate versions of your work. You shouldn't just delete, you
Mhm.
know, like I
And,
rewrote it.
it's uh, it's easy for people to think as soon as they write the end, they're done with the story. That's
Right.
never been the case for me. Those characters that I brought to life are still walking around in my head.
Yeah.
I'm still playing with scenes. And until that book is printed on the page, I'm making changes to it in my head.
Yeah. Unless
Yeah.
you're Hank Moody from Californication, no one does a perfect first draft.
Yeah.
He's always like done. And you're like, there's no editing. He's not Mozart, He's like infallible.
I don't think
Um,
even Mozart did it without making some changes.
no, there is proof to his first drafts being perfect.
Wow.
And what his I can't remember his arch nemesis. They kind of became friends towards the end, but he would buy his work and he couldn't. Thought he was buying reprints, but they were like the first drafts. And then like he talked about how when they found a lot of his when he was working on pieces that didn't get finished, it was just perfect all the way through. You know, because he was a savant. He was he
Hmm.
saw music. That was what they would say. He kind of could like we hear music, he would see the music, and he just understood. Now Beethoven, on the hand, he was deaf, but that's besides.
You couldn't hear anything.
That's right. He used to lay the piano on the floor, and he would put his head on the floor, and then he would hit the piano notes, and that's how he would write later on in life. Because it just, I started as a musician. That was I transitioned from the music world to the writing world when I got a little older.
Yeah.
But going on with some of your writing, you were saying that sometimes your beginnings and your ends usually feel the same after your first draft, and you have to kind of tackle that. Uh, you know, what are your feelings on? Because this is a topic that people kind of talk about with writing. It's like sometimes you start in the middle, and sometimes you end before the end. And what are your thoughts on that with chapters, like starting basically in the middle of movement and stopping before the character leaves the room?
Right. I used to just write linearly, begins at the beginning and ends right when it ends. But now I find myself picking up scenes from the middle of a book.
Mm-hmm.
If they've played over on my head enough times that I'm getting lines. I'm hearing a line that a character is saying, or I'm getting a line of description. Then I'm going to start writing it down. And it doesn't matter if it's the first chapter or the 25th. I want to write that scene down. Will it stay the same? Probably not. I'm
Yeah.
probably going to change it some sort of way. But that Also, I think what you're asking too, correct me if I'm wrong, is do I start in the middle of a scene and do I end before the characters walk out the door?
Yeah,
That
basically.
is style. Sometimes. Um, I like in medias res. I believe that you should start with some action.
Hmm.
Do I start every chapter that way? No, no. I like to balance it off,
Hmm.
especially when pacing is an issue in novels. We give them a lot in that first chapter. You know,
Yeah.
those first 5 pages better blow me away, or you're not going to get anywhere in publishing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Top heavy.
It's just that's the way it is. That first chapter's got to boom, got to grab you by the throat, whatever that might be, you know, and
Hmm.
every genre's got a different way of grabbing you by the throat.
Yep. Yep.
And then you back off a little bit for the second chapter. And by the third chapter, we're a little more relaxed and you can show me more of the characters and the place. And it becomes a little slower. So the pace is fast, a little not so fast, and then
Hmm.
slower, and then anchoring it up again.
Of course, and
Well, I think
especially,
that each one of those chapters demands a different style, you know?
yeah. So depending on your genre as well, thrillers, mysteries, historical fiction, all that. And also if you have a prologue would function as you said the first chapter should function. But if you have a strong prologue, that's the craziness, and then chapter 1 is sort of like let's breathe a little bit, and then chapter 2 is like let's add to that, and then um and for anyone who doesn't know what pacing is, it's just the speed at which information is presented to the reader. Too much would be fast, too little would be slow, but that doesn't mean good or bad. Slow pace and fast pace is not a good or bad thing, but knowing how to utilize fast pace over slow pace, etc., is really the key to pacing.
I
Um,
think I think more than anything else, it's knowing when you've hit the reader too many times. You know, if you've gone and given them really punchy, dramatic scenes and it's relentless, it's time to give them a break. You got to back off and give them something that's quieter, whether it's a
yep.
conversation or a walk in the woods or something that's quieter to give them time to assimilate, maybe drop in some more details about characters or the tension so that it'll build to a next more active chapter.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one of the keys definitely to pacing is you don't want to have 6 chapters in a row where you're like, whoa.
That's what I mean. That's what I just was saying. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes it's all right, but people, when I'm working with like authors really trying to figure out their story, a lot of times you notice they're nervous to give too much to make the pacing feel quick, or they're just so they'll go really slow, and you're like your book's taking a long time to get somewhere, but it doesn't necessarily have to get to the midpoint conflict faster per se. It just means you have to play with your chapters a little bit more because they need movement. I got to be into it, and then I need time to think about what I just saw. you know
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's common in a lot of the students' work that I see as teaching in an MFA program.
Hmm.
I see people putting everything they have, including the person's history of life,
Oh yeah.
in the first chapter, and we don't need it. You know,
Yeah.
it slows down the action. What's this person doing? I get one movement, she reaches for something, then all of a sudden, she's being born and she's going down the birth canal, and I get the rest of the story. And by the time we get to the end of whatever she was reaching for, I forgot who she was.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, and then that is too slow. But I think that when the way that you can learn pacing better than any other is to look at what it's already been published, just to read the people who have done it the best. I mean,
Yeah.
I just strongly suggest don't try to take writing classes. Don't try to be a writer unless you've got 12 books beside your bed almost every day. You know, you've got to be reading the best.
Yeah, and also, if you're going to read the books, at least know what writing techniques are, because again, you could be like they're writing in third person, limited, and if you don't know what that is, but you're reading a book, you're not going to realize what you're reading. You may be like, oh, I see how they're writing this, but you're not understanding their choices. And the same thing comes with, character arcs or prose, or how to use prose, or even.
True, but I don't think it's totally necessary to know what a character arc is to be able to sense that somebody is doing it well on the page. I think
I
that,
agree with you
you
100%.
know,
All I'm saying is, to be able to kind of like organize it and utilize it. Like when I was learning music, I could listen to songs all day and I could understand, oh, they changed the part here, they went faster here, they took the drums out, they did a pattern interrupt. But if I don't understand the musical, I don't need to know the words, I don't need to know the theory, but if I don't know how to incorporate it, like if I don't understand how to play a certain way, then what I'm listening to is not going to help me write music, if
yeah.
that makes sense. I'll
Yep,
have a
absolutely.
disconnect.
I say to my students and to anybody I coach, you don't break the rules until you know what the rules are.
100%.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. And
you
that
got to
doesn't mean you have to
know.
go to 18 years of school.
No, but at least know what a sentence is, know what a paragraph is, know what a conjunction is, know
Yep.
how to use them, you know what parallel structure is.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to know those tools, which are the writers, you've got to have them in your toolbox.
Yep.
And if you don't know how to use them, you don't get to build the characters. But I think that even if somebody doesn't have that ability, if they're reading, they're getting all those rules. They're seeing structure. They're understanding subject verb agreement because it's on the page and it's good, you know?
Yeah, they're getting the raw take of it. They're,
Right.
they're seeing it in action, but and until they know what they're seeing, they, you know what I'm saying? Like if you read a page and all that great stuff is there, they just know it's good. They might feel this is great. Oh, I love how this is working. Oh, I love how this character feels on the page. But until you know what's going on, until I'm not saying you need to know the names of the rules, but if you're looking for tonality, if you're looking for what makes something work, you're only going to get the raw element of it, and you won't be able to kind of manipulate that, if that makes sense. You could
It
use it.
does. It does. And I think I'm advocating both for reading nonstop and what
Yeah.
that teaches you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even just about what you like to read or what works for you.
Yeah.
But also, I totally get that you need to know the rules. You need to know
Yeah.
grammar. I think I see a lot when people don't have that technical ability, the grammar structure, sentence structure, and so forth, and they try to tell a story. I know that if I just go through and edit the whole piece and edit all their grammar, that the story is going to shine.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is it doesn't get a chance to shine because the person doesn't really know the technique they should be using to build the sentences, to build the paragraphs, etc.
Yeah, and when I started with screenwriting, because before I became a novelist, I very much was heavily into the screenwriting world. Again, you said it earlier, it's mostly dialogue, and you have to say a lot with a little to make dialogue effective. So what do screenwriters learn how to do really well? Subtext. What do they learn how to do really well? Move story through words without telling the audience exactly what. So they're good at speaking exposition
Mm-hmm.
without speaking exposition, and especially working with new writers with screenplays, they write these chunk monologues, and they're like, yeah, but so and so wrote it like this, and you're like, but you didn't write what they wrote. They're an expert.
Mm-hmm.
Sorkin can write monologues. Like he's not writing a lot of words. He's writing with purpose. You're not saying anything with this. It's just pontification of a character because you like the way the words sound.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what I usually say, because when I was coming up, they're like, you got to read every day, and you're like, well, I also have to write, I have to practice, I have to understand immersion, I got to learn what is a sensory detail. Well, it's right here, read it in this page. Yeah, but how do I say that? Do I just write what I just saw? Because I don't understand the emotion in the way they used hearing or taste. Or some people forget time. Time is a sense, right? The sense of
Mm-hmm.
time. And I realized early on that I had to say, I'm going to walk outside and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to write one paragraph for speech, for what I hear, what I see, what I taste, what I feel, and how the time felt. And I get, all those examples. And then I start understanding how to use my brain and also the technique. And then I get to see, oh, now I know why I love immersion in books. And I love the way this author does what they do. Same thing with dialogue, like dialogue is dialogue, and if you're just saying things, it's going to destroy the book. There has to be purpose.
And we're not only talking about grammar and sentence structure here. We're talking about definition
Yeah.
and description,
Mm-hmm.
and research.
Yep.
When I was describing the jungle in Thailand, I had National Geographic books open to see what kind of bird, is native to this lake in this area. What are those trees called that were in the back of the platform where the elephants fed? And what was that? It was just noting. It's funny though, because when you do that, when you note a particular bird that is supposed to be in that region rather than just the bird song that floated through the forest, that
Yep.
doesn't give me a specific picture in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that little bit of research and knowing when to be specific and when to blow up a detail gives you a scene, gives you a setting. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of ways to really think about what each word means and how you rely on it, not only to show a picture, but to give us a sound or a taste or a smell, to give us the indication of how two characters are interacting with each other.
Yep.
What this foreign place looks like to me. Fantasy authors have my complete, they're the gods because they build these worlds that are different from the grass to the sky,
Yeah. I have a fruit called the plessa fruit in the fantasy world, and it's the number one fruit. Everyone's like, I just want to eat the plessas, because the way they're talked about, the way they're described, the way it tastes, the sounds. Everyone's like, I just want plessas, because you get like a sugar high from it. If you eat enough of them, you could actually get high from it. Because your body just gets overwhelmed. But they're so good,
and it's completely invented, right?
it's all fake. It's a
I
fruit of
love
the
it.
gods, they call it. The
I love
divine.
it.
But yeah, and that's why, because you have a voice. I know you have a voice. You've written enough books. The way you talk, especially in your TEDx, which was excellent, by the way, a good 30-minute talk. If anyone wants to get, it's 28 minutes, but whatever. But like, new writers sometimes fall under that. I would say that myth that like all you should be doing is reading. And then what does their voice sound like? Their voice sounds like the books they've been reading. Well, they do this in their chapter and the character has their moment here. So I'm going to do exactly what they did. And, to the point, I just try to get away from that black white, so people don't get trapped in that,
Right.
like,
I
oh,
don't,
I'm not saying
when
you're
I
doing
say to read
Yeah.
to my students, I want them to read everything.
Oh yeah.
And I'm the one who uses myself as an example. When I'm writing fiction, I'm reading poetry.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah. I don't want to sound like somebody else.
Yeah.
Even though I have favorite writers that I'd love to sound like. And I'd be very happy if somebody compared me to them.
Yeah.
But, I really need to think about the language at that point. So when I'm writing fiction, I'm reading poetry. And I tell that to my students. If you're a sci-fi writer, if you're writing spec fiction, you should be reading romance every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll look at me like I'm crazy, but it gives you a different viewpoint. It stretches you a little bit to this side when you're supposed to be going to that side or up straight in the middle. Whatever your genre does, read something else, but read the best.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to read spec fiction, you should be reading Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I was starting out in music, I was a jazz guy, believe it. It's craziness. But I made a career in doom metal. And the one thing that people were saying, like, whenever a song started, not only did the sound of the music you would be like, I know that band, but on top of it, we know it's your song. It has a style to it. And I would have never had that style if I didn't play jazz, rock, blues, heavy metal. I even helped compose rap, and lyrics, at some one point in my career, because I was never opposed to, like you're saying, read everything. Like, absorbing allows you tools. It's the Bob Ross of reality. Is now I have paint to play with. And I think that is the important thing to take away from reading, is that, like you said, if you're writing sci-fi and you're reading romance, there is romance in sci-fi. Like, you don't have to just have aliens. You can
Yep.
have, and you can see, oh, but I don't want to put romance elements in my book. Yeah, but the way you feel through the love and emotion through romance books, you can put that into any genre. And so that's important to kind of sense those strong tools from reading a lot. Especially with fantasy, where you're saying poetry. That's a great example, because the fluidity of the prose turns into a part of that language, the
Right.
narrative language. And if it has a lyrical touch to it, I think you could really stand out as a writer, because you're not just writing what happens, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. I think that happens in the first draft. We write what happens,
Yeah.
and then we go in when we're doing the second draft or the third draft, and we write how it happens.
Yeah.
And kind of embroider the scenes a little bit. And now you start to see that there's 4 different shades of gray in the forest rather than just one.
Yep.
And it gets to be a little bit more specific. So,
Yeah,
um,
I always say, on the channel, I say narrative is made up of both plot and story. Plot is what needs to happen, and story is how it happens. And your
mhm,
first draft is just getting it down. Like, what is the plot?
right.
How does this work out? And now let's add some color to it. Let's build it up. Put some clothes on it. Let's grow the story to really do it.
That's process. Some people do what I call a total regurgitation of whatever they have inside them. And they smack everything they
Yep.
got down on the page.
Yeah.
And that's their first draft.
Yep.
I don't do that. I do, the bones, and I
Mhm.
go back in afterwards. And then it's, when I put the muscle on, and maybe, here's a heart here and a piece of hair there. But I don't dump that all on the page the first time.
Yep.
And that's my process. Like you
That's
said
a good one.
earlier, we all have our own processes, but mine is get the backbone of the story down, and then I can play around with it.
Yeah, if the foundation is there and the plot makes sense, and you're like, everything is kind of fitting together, now you can make it as pretty as you want, and it's going to work. But if you make it really pretty and it doesn't work, it doesn't matter how pretty it is, it's still garbage.
Exactly. Exactly. It still needs to read like a story.
Yes. And to go back to sci-fi, I would recommend not reading George R.R. Martin's sci-fi because Dawn was saying read good examples, and we all know he was a failed sci-fi author before he got into television. Actually, I don't know if you know that he went from sci-fi to television, and then from television he decided he was writing a thing, and then the first scene of House of Thrones, the Game of Thrones with the wolf, that whole chapter popped in his head, and his life changed after that. But I think it's crazy.
Not overnight, though. He takes a long time to write.
Well, his first book he wrote while he was writing fast for television. I guess he was writing episodes of TV, but yeah, he just gets a little. There's a really great interview with him and Stephen King where he's just like, "How do you write so effing fast?" he's like, "I just write 5 to 6 pages a day."
Stephen, I've met a number of times over the years at conventions and stuff. And I'll never forget that there was a time that I saw him that he said he was going to go see his first movie. I think it was Carrie.
Yeah.
And he had to smuggle in a Pabst beer under his jacket because he didn't want to be scared by the movie.
That's funny.
Yeah, he and I have done signings together. He's very dry wit. His whole family's writers.
Yeah, that's right. But his son changed his name so he could try to kind of make it on his own merit.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So he's interesting too, because again, his process, as he's spoken about numerous times, is he just writes. He just,
Yeah.
wherever it goes, and if he feels it's getting boring, he throws a monster in the corner. He says, I just throw a monster in the room and call it a day, and so, but again, that might not work for someone else. So, I'm an extreme outliner. If you looked at my outlining process, it's a heavy process, but I don't recommend that for
This
everybody.
is mine for the current book. So you can see there's all kinds of writing all over it.
Now, is that a zero draft, or is that just notes? I don't mean just, but is that notes with notes?
This is my, I was looking at specifically each of the chapters is written from a different character's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking at weight and seeing how much was in there. And then I wanted a thread to go through the book, which I didn't think I had gotten all the way through, and I was right. I needed to add a chapter. So I wanted a thread of her. The main character is an artist. So that's my version of the outline for that book.
Is that what you did for? Let me see. What is the book you're playing with? This book here,
Analyzing the Prescotts. That one, that changed a number of times because we went from the main character was the transgender father, and I realized I didn't want to appropriate that voice. So I brought it back and put the point of view character is the therapist now. And each of
who is not a transgender.
No. Each of the characters, the family, the Prescott family, and there's 5 of them, and the therapist all kind of have their broken up chapters. So I played a lot with point of view in that story.
So are you saying in that novel you don't necessarily touch on the POV of the transgender person?
Yes, I do.
I do.
She's just not the primary character. She told the story in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And now she's one of the major characters. I mean, they're all pretty major, but the therapist is the one who's the director of the show, basically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And is it a memoir, more or less, or not of yours, but it's a fiction?
No, it's fiction. It's fiction. When I was doing my Ph.D., I was doing research on transgender authors and what they wrote pre and post transition.
Yeah.
So I read a lot of work by a lot of different authors. And through that research, I built my dissertation, which was 350 pages on that subject. Mm-hmm. But I also had this story about this family who was going through this and what each individual in the family would, how they would deal with that.
Now, when you say you had this story, you're saying like while you were doing these interviews and doing your research, you were developing a story in your head, or was it a story that people were telling you and then you sort of took their pieces and put it together into a cohesive?
No, it's a story that was developing in my head. Did I get some bits and pieces of information that were valuable to the book? Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Of course. But it's a sort of an amalgamation of everything that I went through during the time that I was deep in the research, and realizing, that our written voice, the voice on the page, is the same. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you change your name, if you lose 5 toes, or whatever. And if you have 5 toes, that's a good one.
It's my next book.
Yeah. And it's funny because I met some of the writers after the research was done. And one of them on Facebook, believe it or not. And it was so nice to not judge how you feel about a person, except what they're, presenting on the page.
Yeah.
If I had known them in any other form, that would have influenced my research. Anyways, the Prescotts came out of that time period, but it's not a memoir. It doesn't really include anything that's, it's not like my other work that came from a memory of my sister. No, this is a totally fictional family and a totally fictional, bad, sick by herself therapist.
Yeah. And, to kind of jump back to that moment, like where you're like, when you're reading the books, of the author's books, they're not necessarily, their pronouns are book, books, book self. Like they are the representation of their words and not necessarily the representation of their physical form. Um, did did the research lead you to say that I need to tell this story, or was it something you were interested in telling, so you did the research?
The research led me to it. And I'll tell you why I came to that subject matter to begin with. When I was doing my MFA at Vermont College, my research was on female authors, their public and their private voices. So a lot of the people like Mary Shelley wrote a big ass book publicly, and you don't realize that she shared a journal with Percy. So everything she wrote, he could read, and she was terse. I mean, this woman who wrote these flowery, huge, erudite paragraphs was absolutely terse in her journal. Anyways, that research kind of was following me through to the PhD program. And when they asked me, what would you like to study while you're here? What are you going to do research on? I knew I had to do research on something that hadn't been done before.
Yeah.
And this had not been done before. And it was something that I felt like I did not know. So I was teaching myself more than anything else. I was curious. I wanted to see what it meant to be trans and whether or not that writer explored it on the page.
Yeah. Did you discover what it may or may not feel to be trans? Did you feel like you were connecting to these stories or the character, or even more so, I would say you would be the outside perception of it? Like, were you connecting with the therapist and the parents and everyone else?
Yeah, I think the person that I like the least in analyzing the Prescotts is actually Cotton, because I feel like she could have, really done this family, and she did a lot of damage as it was, and nobody ever faults her for it.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily her fault either, because every single one of the members of this family was looking for their own identity within the family. So it's family dynamics. That came through in a lot of the transgender people's memoirs. And I read dozens and dozens of them. And that, more than anything else, came through. It was what happened within their family of birth that really informed where any of them were going to go for the rest of their lives. So that, and I know that. I mean, I think we all know what happens when our family's screwed up. We are screwed up. Not that I'm saying, it just hurts when a family doesn't say, okay, you are who you are. It doesn't really matter if you have red hair or 3 legs or whatever. We love you anyways. When that family says, no, we hate you for who you are, that screws you up.
Yep.
So that emotional impact had to be part of the story, because I saw that in every single one of the memoirs. And, I gotta say this though. I mean, I have quite a few former students that are trans, and friends and family members. And most of these people are probably in better shape than I am. They've dealt with a lot of shit.
Yeah.
Excuse my French.
So that's all right. We speak Italian here.
Okay.
Parlez-vous français? Oui. So the thing is, people forget the truth, which is, as long as we're not physically hurting others or going out of our way to make people's lives miserable, who cares what everyone's doing? It doesn't affect our lives. It's like when the gay movement first started way back in the day, and like they couldn't even get married, or you couldn't even be seen in public. And it's like, them being gay doesn't affect us, just like us being straight doesn't affect them. Like,
I know.
Like, they want to get married. It's not, well, it's going to destroy the sanctity of marriage. No, you can be married and happy. And they could also be happy and, whatever.
Yeah.
They're probably going to be more happy than you are in your straight monogamous relationship. Like, it's always been interesting to me My opinion on the trans or any community is always the same. Are you hurting people? Are you going out of your way to make people's lives miserable? If the answer is no for both of those, I'm for it. So it doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you're white, black, whatever, LGBTQ. It doesn't. But if you're killing people, that's
You're
the
not my
part.
friend anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's how I feel.
yeah. And
Absolutely.
let's go a little crazier. Let's say they're a trans black person and they kill people. I don't care that they're trans or black. I care that they killed people. Like, we don't know how to separate that reality. Because we categorize. Oh, it's black crime, it's white crime, it's this crime, it's Italian crime, and it's like, no, it's crime. Like, people are doing horrible things. That's when you got to start caring. But if they're dressing and I know people who literally refer to themselves as frogs, frog self, and I just go, great, have a nice day. Are you happy? Yes. Are you hitting people? No. Keep doing you. Like, that's the reality, and I love that you wrote this book and that you're taking, as you said in your TED talks, you're using your art to really open up a subject that's important, that needs to be talked about. So I commend you for that.
Well, I think that the thing that I want more than anything else out of this book is to point out that there's never just one story. This
Mm-hmm.
is each person in this story is an individual, and each person who deals with this situation is an individual as well. We can't put people in categories.
Would you say and I agree with you 100% with that. You can't just be like, well, they are this thing, because it's like when people ask what a religion, I'm not going to tell you, because if I tell you I'm Jewish, not that I am, but if I say I'm Jewish, now I'm that thing. Like, you get that bias. So it's nice. It's nice that you're pointing that out in the novel. Would you say your approach to this book, and I'm not saying it is Magnolia, but is that what it was called? The one with Tom Cruise, and it has like a bunch of POVs of a subject. But is the book written where it's like each POV has their own story, or is their POV for the story of the trans character?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Each of them, I hope I brought to light that each of them have their own story. I mean, Janice is the oldest of the kids. She's a rebel, but she's the one that ends up taking care of everybody,
Mm-hmm. Well, the eldest, yeah.
Yep. The middle child really doesn't want all this to be happening. She's very cheerleader, fun,
Mm-hmm.
wants to go out and party. And she's quietly cracking. Nobody really sees that.
Mm-hmm.
And Marcus is the young one who used to play video games with his dad, still wants to know if he can still call him dad.
Mm-hmm.
So each one of those has a story, because you see them at school, you see them with other relationships, and you also see what's going on basically in the therapist's office, in Cotton's office, what they choose to bring to that session.
So what you're basically saying, are you saying that the father character is the one who transitioned and they're now a she?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I
And
know that is.
she chooses to let the kids call her dad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I've seen in real life where their children, they're like, well, that's who they knew me as, so that's just being a dad doesn't define my sexuality. It's what they refer to me as, the role, or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
So that's interesting. Now, Dawn, we're getting pretty close. We have an hour in, so I like to kind of, let's start wrapping it up a little bit. I like to end every show, as my audience knows, with a question, and every single person on the show gets this question. So I'm going to post it up on the screen, then I'll read it, and then feel free to answer it. Here it goes. What is one piece of advice you discovered about writing, either through someone else or yourself, that completely changed the way you approach the writing process?
That's easy. I have a mentor who ended up being a best friend of mine. He was my writing instructor at the bachelor's degree level. I ended up sharing an office with him because I ended up teaching. I was an older student. I ended up teaching after I graduated. And he read my first published novel, and suggested that I slow down. And he physically said to me, "You need a pen and a pad of yellow lined paper." He said, "Just write that way."
Yeah.
And that one piece of advice really has worked for me in so many different situations. I can't even begin to tell you. When I think that a scene is moving too fast, I get off my laptop and pull out that pen and that yellow line paper, and it slows me down. It forces me to really kind of kick back into the sentences, to think more about the characters, to really see the scene. And that piece of advice has resonated with me for years.
And you write long form at that point. You're writing the scenes out long form on
Right,
the pad.
right. It doesn't, it's not the whole novel.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just when I need to slow a scene down or to find a character,
I like that. I think that's good advice for life too. Sometimes when we're going too fast and we can't take a breath, maybe step aside just for a moment, sit down. You're allowed to breathe a little bit, kind of center yourself before you jump back into the fray. I think
That's exactly what it does,
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then of course you're working it again, because after you write it down, you have to translate that into type.
Yeah.
So you're rethinking and revising as you're putting it on the page for maybe the first time. It's already been written twice, though.
Yeah. Now my secret is I actually purchased the monkey, and I give the monkey all my notes, and they just, most of it's gibberish, and there's a lot of bananas everywhere, but
good trick.
Yeah, it saves me a lot of time.
Do you pay the minimum wage?
So anyway, don't mention money. He doesn't know what it is yet. Dawn, before we say our goodbyes, how do people find you? What's the best way to get to you?
Well, I'm all over social media. You look up Dawn Reno Langley or Dawn R. Langley. And I have a website, dawnrenolangley.net. That has my event schedule. It's got all my books there, my bio, pictures, connection to my blog, everything you want. I have Instagram too. I think that's at Prof Langley. TikTok, I do a meditation every morning at Dawn Langley.
All right.
And I think that's it.
Okay. And for anyone out there, if you're listening, it's Langley. That's Langley. Dawn and Reno are pretty intuitive. You bring a dawn to us. I feel the sun rose on the show today, and I'm excited that you reached out. I'm glad I got to look into not only your brand, but your stories and what kind of voice you're adding to the community of writers over the years as a contributor to the creative element. So Dawn, thank you very much for being a guest on The Right Mindset today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. It was fun.
All right. Excellent. Everybody who's listening, by the way, all her information is going to be in the description of both the YouTube video, and if you're listening on any of the Spotify, what's have yous, you can just see her website there and her bio. And she also teaches, you're an editor. You help out people figure out how to write.
Yes, I do.
All that's on her website, and check her out. I think you'll find something in what she writes. Might be inside you, because remember, we're more than the words on the page. All right, everybody. Thank you so very much. Have a great day, and as always, keep developing the right mindset. See you next time. Bye.